Is it too Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum and very good evening, everyone. First and foremost, thank you for joining in our live webinar on rubric design for authentic assessment brought to you by CDAE. I am Hazwani, your host for today. So before we get started, let me provide you with a brief overview of what we'll be covering for today. In this webinar, we will explore rubric design for authentic assessment, emphasizing its crucial role in enhancing learning outcomes. You will gain valuable insights into creating clear, effective rubrics that support authentic assessment practices. Now, allow me to introduce our esteemed panel of speakers who will be sharing their expertise with us today. Our first speaker is technologist Dr. Mastura Azmi, Deputy Director for University Academic Quality Center, also a senior lecturer at School of Civil Engineering USM. Joining us next is Dr. Nuridah Sabtu, also a senior lecturer at the School of Civil Engineering USM. We are very honored to have both of you today with us. Ladies and gentlemen, let's not keep you waiting any longer and get started with our session for today. Without further delay, please welcome Dr. Mastura Azmi. Dr. Mastura, are you here with us?
Okay, Assalamualaikum. Can you hear me?
Waalaikumsalam. Yes, Doctor.
All right.
We can.
Okay. Let me share my screen first. Okay. I hope you can see my screen now.
Yes, we can, Doctor.
All right. Thank you. Okay, without any delay, let me start with the first part of today's webinars, which is this is basically an introduction to rubric design for authentic assessment. And in here, we're going to focus on effective rubric to support authentic assessment practices. Okay, let me share you a little bit on the introduction first. Will be our content and also outcomes for today's webinar session. There are three main topics that we're going to cover. Firstly, on the introduction to authentic assessment. And in here, we are expecting to be able to define and explain the significance of authentic assessment in the context of higher education. And then we will go into alignment of USMPLO with the EAC, which is Engineering Accreditation Council. This is an example of another program learning outcomes, and also the Kaluhia framework, which I will also introduce to you a little bit later. And in here, we will see on how we align all of the three outcomes for the measurement of our students' competences. And then the final topic will be on the selecting appropriate tools for measuring PLO, where this is the main title of our session today, which is the design of the rubric to effectively measure specific learning outcomes. And also we will also explain on the key criteria that make up high quality rubric, and also explaining on why it is crucial to assign appropriate weightage to different criteria rubric. Dr. Nuridah will explain more on the example on the implementation of authentic assessment at our school level in our program. So first, let me introduce to you what is AUA. AUA is actually the short form for an authentic assessment. And by definition, we can see here, it is actually a set of methods or techniques for assessing the academic achievement of students that includes activities requiring the application of acquired knowledge and skills to real-world situations, and that is often seen as an alternative to standardized testing. And another example of the definition for authentic assessment is a form of assessment in which the students are asked to perform real-world tasks that demonstrate meaningful application of essential knowledge and skills. Similarly, Grant-Wiggins also explaining on the authentic assessment, the importance of usage of knowledge to fashion performances effectively and creatively. Okay, and then why is it important? The benefit and importance of using authentic assessment in our teaching and learning. First, the importance is we would like to have a meaningful assessments to the students, and then we will also would like for the students to enhance their critical thinking and especially to prepare our graduates for professional challenges in the future. The benefits of authentic assessment is that we would like to encourage deep learning during their lessons, and also we would like to develop higher order thinking skills, whereby if we in our university we are using the revised version of Bloom's taxonomy, so we are focusing more on the higher order thinking skills, which is about C4 to C6. And also we would like to have a holistic evaluation for our assessment. Okay. So of course there is a differences between the traditional assessment and also the authentic assessment. And to compare this, we will see also the type of assessment that we choose. In traditional assessment, we focus more on note memorization and also standardized examination, or tests, or final examination, versus the authentic assessment where we encourage students to be assessed through practical tasks, project, real life solutions. And we can see here the differences that in comparison between the traditional assessment and authentic assessment in terms of the type of assessment. For example, multiple choice tests or structured essays versus a project-based assessment. Okay. The next part we would like to see on the alignment of outcomes, because when we introduce any assessment, we would like to how to say realize on the suitability and the alignment of the assessment to the outcomes. Okay. And in order for us to do that, usually, typically, we in our program, we encourage to map first our framework. And in this case, in USM, we know that we are how to say our program learner outcomes are basically following the Malaysian Qualification Framework 2.0. Okay, but in our department, in other department, especially the departments who have their own professional bodies requirement, they will also have a different set of learning outcomes. And therefore, what we do in our practice is that we try to map between the many program learning outcomes that we have. Okay, in order to do that, there are a few key points that I would like to highlight in order for us to adapt to different framework. Okay, first and foremost is that we need to understand the needs of the Malaysian Qualification Framework 2.0, and also any of our program standard. In my experience, in our experience in our school, we are focusing more, we are how to say a bidding to the EAC standard, which is the Engineering Accreditation Council standard, whereby this program standard is to just to give an idea to everyone, it is actually equivalent to our COPA. Okay, and the needs include for example, in MQF 2.0, we need to ensure that it is up to the level that is intended. Whereby in MQF 2.0, it says here that we need to follow, for example, the undergraduate degree level is actually the level descriptor is actually level 6. I'm not going to explain detail here. This is something that we all of us should know when we design our program. So it must be in accordance to the framework whereby we use MQF 2.0. And for an example here, I'm showing here the undergraduate degree level is actually level 6. That is the requirement set by MQA. And then also we have other requirements, other needs by program standard. And in the experience of engineering programs, we also need to understand the requirement for complex engineering problems and complex engineering activities. This is actually following the Engineering Accreditation Council standards. The other needs that we also need to understand, for example, kemahiran insaniah, this is required by MOHI, okay, Ministry of Higher Education. And also, we will also need to understand all the learning domains, okay, whereby it is actually translated into our learning outcomes. In MQF 2.0, we have 5 learning domains, which when we redistribute it in our learning outcomes, it becomes the 11 program learning outcomes in our university. Okay, as is shown here in the column number 3 on the right side, the image on the right side. And when we have this, we have the 11 PLO USM based on the MQF 2.0, and we also have other outcomes based on our program standards. We need to do this mapping. And of course, for programs with professional bodies and standards, we need to follow how to say, when we are going to report for our auditing and everything accreditation, we need to actually put all the measurement based on the professional bodies program standard. But we do realize that we are still how to say, a program under USM. So therefore, we need to do the mapping, because we know that in USM we still need to follow the how to say, the process in our university, and the process in our universities requires all of the documents, as we already know, for accreditation, including the BPK itself, the teaching plan, the teaching and learning activities. And for us to do that, we need to be able to translate all our learning outcomes here, the competences that we want the students to achieve at the end of the program, in documentation. For example, in our experience in our program, we use, for example, the BPK. BPK is using the USM PLO, which is following the Malaysian Qualification Framework 2.0 learning domain, which is here. We have the all 11 USM PLOs. But in our teaching plan, we use a different sets of program outcomes, which is here. So the difference is just the arrangement. For engineering program outcomes, we have 12 program outcomes. So we have to follow that in our teaching plan. And our teaching and learning activities, our design of our activities includes complex engineering problems and complex engineering activities, which is part of the requirement of the standards. So for our program, what we have to incorporate is all of the requirements and needs, not only by the MQA, but also by our professional body. So I would say that it is not like a very easy task. The department, the school really has to sit down many, many times in order for us to be able to align with all of the requirements of USMPLO and also the EACPOs. So the differences is just the terminology. In engineering standard, we use POs. In USM PLO, in USM we use the PLO terminology, but the main idea is the same. It's actually the program learning outcomes. Okay. So, what happened is that, what if we want to follow another framework, which in our case, we also try to adopt another type of framework. Meaning that not only we are compulsory to follow the two framework that is already set by the university and also the engineering board, we also attempted to adopt another framework where we call it as Kalohia framework. In this Kalohia framework, which it is translated to measuring and comparing achievement of learning outcomes in higher education in Asia, we try to determine a common reference framework that is developed based on common understanding between members. And in this framework, it incorporates the needs to address knowledge, skills, and responsibilities in measuring the PLO, the graduate competences. Dr. Nurida later on will share some of the key points in the dimension and also sub-dimension, which is equivalent to the PLO USM. Okay, so for just information to everyone here, so in Kaluhia we have about 17 countries, if I'm not mistaken. Sorry, 17 institution. This is basically the institution that is following the Kaluhia framework, and we also have our European counterpart who actually also guide us and also together with us in understanding on the whole Kalohia framework. Okay. In Kalohia framework, we have the dimension and sub-dimension. I'm not going to go detail, just to briefly introduce to you. Here we have like four dimension, and for each of the dimension, we have the sub-dimension. And for each of the sub-dimension, we have the domains that we want the students to be able to do or be able to complete before they are graduating. And I'm not going to go to detail here. This is just an overview. So there are other platforms that actually explain more detail on this framework. And what we did in our school is that we try to map the dimension and subdomains to the EAC, also the Engineering Accreditation Council POs. Okay, so that is how we do it. So whenever you are going to adapt to another framework, usually what we do is that in our department, in our school, we usually sit down together and try to map again to our, how to say, initial program learning outcomes. So we will see that whether we can match it or we cannot match it. So after that only we will design our learning outcomes accordingly. Okay. So the next part, which is the more important part here, is selecting appropriate tools. Okay. So when we already have our learning outcomes, we know that these are the competences that we want the students to be able to achieve at the end of the study, which is about 4 years in our program. So we have the set of competences which is translated into the program learning outcomes or program outcomes. And then we also have our CLOs, the course learning outcomes, which is usually map one to one. For each of the course learning outcome, it is usually typically mapped to the specific program learning outcomes. So for each of these, we map it like one to one, and then we already identify it during the design of the program. Okay, so once we already map this the CLO and PLO, after that, from the course itself in the CLO, we define the suitable assessment that we want to do for to measure the learning outcome, the course learning outcomes. So, for example, for that specific CLO, course learning outcome, we select a project or an assignment, for example, or probably a presentation. Okay, so we select the type of assessment, and from that type of assessment, then we will build our question or our problems accordingly, and we need to have suitable tools to measure this. And for us to be able to do that, usually we will introduce rubric, which is rubric, as we know, is a scoring tools that be used to evaluate students' work based on specific criteria and standard. And in order for us to develop a good design rubric, there is usually 5 components in that. The first one is identify the learning outcomes, which is our CLO and PLO, and then we determine the performance criteria. Okay, and then thirdly, we describe the level of performance. Number 4, we develop specific descriptors, and at the end of the day, we review and refine, which is really, really important as part of CQI process. Okay. So let's go in more detail for all the 5 elements shown here. So the first one is identify learning outcomes. So in our course, we already identify our CLO. So from that CLO, we know that we're going to measure the students' ability through several assessment or maybe one assessment. So in that assessment, we need to clearly define what the students are expected to learn and achieve at the end of the course of the assignment or the assignment based on our CLO. And we need to ensure that the assignment is actually measurable, okay, which follow the SMARTS rule. Okay, for example, the students will be able to analyze and interpret data to make informed the engineering decision. This is just a general example, okay. Then from that, we will determine the performance criteria. In here, what we need to do is we need to establish the specific elements of student work that will be evaluated. How do we do this? This is actually by breaking down the learning outcomes into key components or criteria. Okay, based on the content or the topic that we're going to teach, then we will put this as the component of the criteria that we're going to measure. And also, we also need to focus on the essential skills and knowledge that the assessment aims to measure. Okay, so we know that when we design our CLO, we have the verbs, we have the competences that we want to measure, and we have the condition and also standards. Okay, so basically based on this, we break it down into smaller elements that we want to focus to measure our students. So for example, accuracy of data analysis, clarity of interpretation, relevance of conclusion. These are some of the example of the elements, specific elements that the student will be evaluated. Okay, the third component of a good design rubric is by describing the level of performance. Okay, so we need to create a scale that describe varying levels of mastery for each criterion. So for us to do this, we need to decide the number of performance level. It can be like the Likert skills. Okay, so we can decide whether we want to use 4 levels or 5 levels. The key point here is that we need to be consistent. If you have, like for example, for one course, you probably have like 3 or 4 assignments, and then when you want to, or probably just one assignment but many examiners, so you need to be consistent in the measurement. So when you design the rubric, be consistent. Please do not like one lecturer use 4 levels, another lecturer use 5 levels, okay? Or for example, for assignment number 1, 4 levels, for assignment number 2, 5 levels. Sometimes this will be, how to say, inconsistency in the marks, okay? The next part is we need to define what each level looks like in terms of student performance for each criterion. So the levels could be something like excellent, good, satisfactory, or not satisfactory. So this is some of the examples of the levels that we can use to describe the level of performance. The next one, which is number 4, is actually to develop specific descriptor. So the first in here, what we are looking into is that we need to provide detailed descriptions or indicators for each performance level and criterion. We need to do is that we need to use clear and concise language to describe each level. So what you want the students to be able to do in the descriptor. So ensure that the descriptors are specific and avoid ambiguity. So for example, if we want to measure the criteria for accuracy of data analysis, okay, so probably the descriptions will be for excellence. An example is that analysis is highly accurate with no errors. For good, probably it will be something like analysis is mostly accurate with minor errors. For satisfactory, an example will be analysis has several errors but demonstrate basic understanding. For not satisfactory, for example, analysis contains significant errors and lacks of understanding. So this is some of the example of description in our rubric. The final criteria in order for us to design a rubric is to review and refine. So in order for us to do this, we need to test the rubric with sample assignments and seek feedbacks from colleagues and also our students, if possible, all the students. Otherwise, at least the rubric is already vetted. So vetting process is also important for rubric design. Not only just for our final examination courses or questions, but also for rubric. So by doing the vetting process for our rubric, we can, how to say, confirm that our rubric is suitable to be used to measure our students' work. Secondly, we use the rubric to grade sample works and identify any inconsistencies. So probably when we design our question, the students, how to say, do not understand what we actually want them to do. So typically the best practice is that when we design our question, the rubric will also be given to the students. So when the rubric is given to the students, then students should be, how to say, be made known of what is expected, to what level they are expected to produce their work. Okay. And then by doing this, we can actually try to grade our rubric, the students' work using our rubric, and we try to find whether is there any inconsistencies. Okay, and we can actually revise our descriptors and criteria based on feedbacks and observation. This will be, how to say, a very good practice for CQI. And in our experience in our school, we always go back and revise our rubric once, how to say, once a cycle of assessment is completed, meaning that the next following semester probably we take a look again. If there is no much problem, then probably we can fix our rubric for maybe another one cycle more. So it must be, how to say, relevant to the assessment question that we set. Otherwise, if you change, for example, you change the way that you design the question, then you still use the same rubric as the previous assignment, it will be, how to say, unfair to the students. Okay. And then the example is given here is piloting the rubric in a small class or with a group of students. We can do that if you have a big class. Otherwise, in my opinion, I will say that vetting is actually kind of enough, how to say, for us to verify and validate our rubric. So the key point in designing effective rubric is that there are five items here, criteria. First, it must be aligned with the objectives. So we need to ensure that the rubric aligns with the course objective and specific learning outcomes. To tell you the truth, we learn through many processes of developing rubric. Um, because we are lacking initially when we started to use rubric, it is usually very general, not specifically meant to answer the learning outcomes. So it is always be the criteria will be very vague, and we don't quantify it, and probably it is like how to say, too much differences. So what happened is that sometimes the marks skewed to the right side of the rubric, or the marks skewed only to the left side of rubric. When we design our rubric, we are assuming that we will have like a good bell curve. Okay, good bell curve of marks. So we will have like the whole range of marks. Of course, we want our students to score more. So whenever they already receive the rubric, they should actually be able to score more. But we don't want the rubric to be too easy for the students to score. I mean, not how to say, not make, how to say, I'm not saying that this is not fair to the student. It's just that we want to ensure that it covers all the required elements in our assessment. The next is we need to be specific. In order to be specific, we need to use the SMART criteria here, which is specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. Thirdly, we need to be consistent. Yeah. In order for us to do that, we need to ensure that the rubric allows for consistent and fair assessment, especially if we have many examiners. Okay, if you have more than one examiners, we need to be consistent. The rubric must be, how to say, consistent enough that whenever we have a different examiners, everybody will have the similar understanding of the rubric. Number 4 is the student involvement. We actually should encourage involvement of students in the rubric development process to enhance their understanding and also the buy-in. And finally, regular updates. As I mentioned just now, we need to review and update the rubric to reflect any changes in the course objective or the assessment methods. Okay, so the next point that I want to highlight is the key criteria for high quality rubrics. There are 5 criteria for high quality rubrics. Number 1 is clarity. The criterion and performance level must be clearly defined so that the students and also the examiners understand the expectations. And then we need to reduce ambiguity and confusion. Okay, so an example of a clear rubric is that, for example, the element says that the data analysis is accurate and free from errors. Second criteria is relevance. The criteria should directly relate to the learning outcomes and the skills or knowledge being assessed. So it must be made clear this these criteria relate to which learning outcomes. Okay. So example, if the learning outcomes is to develop critical thinking skills, a criterion might be evidence of critical analysis. Okay. Thirdly is consistency. The rubric should allow for consistent scoring across different examiners and assignments. This to promote fairness and reliability in assessment. For example, clear descriptor for each performance level to ensure uniform grading. Number 4, the fourth criteria is the comprehensiveness. Rubric should cover all essential aspects of the performance being assessed. It must be holistic evaluation and covers all dimensions of competency. An example for writing an assignment, the criteria might include organization, grammar, content accuracy, and also originality. Not only on the technical skills, but also how the students organize, okay, the accuracy of the content, and also originality. The final key criteria is specificity. So descriptor for each performance level should be specific and detailed. This will help students to understand exactly what is expected at each level. And this will reduce subjectivity in grading. For example, instead of good analysis, we should use analysis is thorough and includes relevant data. So student will know that the analysis must be thorough and must use relevant data. So the importance of weightage in rubric criteria. So we already take a look on all of the components, the criteria, the performance level, and also the descriptions inside our rubric. The next key point that I want to highlight here is the importance of weightage in rubric criteria. There are 5 elements of importance of the weightage in rubric criteria. Number 1 is reflecting priority. So weightage should reflect the relative importance of each criterion. This is to ensure that the more critical aspect of the assignment have a greater impact on the final grade. And this will guide the student to focus their efforts on the most important element. In our design, for example, when we design our BPK and when we design our teaching plan, we try to design our course learning outcomes to the specific element of assessment with a specific weightage. And then from there, we do the design based on the activities that we do in our class, and we put the SLT or the student learning time. So we need to ensure that this say constructive alignment of our design is applied in our class, meaning that if we want to focus more on the PO3, for example, so the weightage should be more there with more SLT given there. So for that to happen, the students need to understand that by using the weightage, the students will think that, okay, this is where I should put more effort, okay, and more concentration in my solution. So an example, in a project, quality of analysis might have a higher weightage than the presentation skills. This is an example of the priority of weightage. Secondly is actually balance weightage, sorry for this. So balance weightage ensures that no single criterion disproportionately affects the overall assessment. And this will promote a fair and balanced evaluation and also helps in accurately reflecting students' ability and performance. We need to avoid a scenario where minor formatting issues significantly lower the overall grade. Okay, so when we do this, we don't want any part of our how to say description in our rubric to be wrongly placed, something like that. So why how do we eliminate this how to say this error? By doing vetting. When we have vetting, a group vetting, for example, we can ensure that everything is already like almost perfect, if not 100% perfect. So at least that it is already balanced when we want to do the assessment. Next is aligning the learning outcomes. So weightage should align with the emphasis of the learning outcomes. And how to do this is that we need to ensure that rubric supports and reinforces the learning outcomes. So if our design of our course is, how to say, more percentages on the cognitive domain, meaning that the weightage should also aligns to that. If we are more concerned, for example, if the design of the course is more, how to say, focusing on the communication skills, then probably the weightage for communication skills should be bigger. Okay, so in here, the example, it says here that if critical thinking is a key learning outcome, the criteria related to analysis and evaluation should have higher weightage. So therefore, when we design our course, we already know that this course is actually focusing more on our students' communication skills or probably teamwork skills. So if we focus more on the communication skills, then the weightage for that assessment and also the SLT will be bigger chunk on that course. Okay. Number 4 is transparency and clarity. So clearly communicated weightage helps students understand how their work will be assessed. So this will guide students in allocating their effort appropriately, because when we design our course, we already design the amount of SLT that is being how to say proposed for the students to do the effort that they need to do contributes. Okay. For example, when we provide a breakdown of the weightage in the rubric, when we provide the weightage, the breakdown for all the weightage, then the student will say, okay, I need to focus more on this, because what is expected is that for me to complete the analysis in more detail. This will be the major part of our how to say the outcome of the course. Finally, is the transparency and clarity. Weightage can be adjusted to support different level of students' ability and learning needs. And in this case, we need to allow for flexibility in assessment to cater to diverse learning needs. Example, providing higher weightage to creative thinking in an advanced course. So when we set up the criteria, we need to have like what we call as the performance criteria for that. So which one that we want to emphasize more, even in the quality of the analysis, for example. So we need to define the element under the criteria. Probably, how should I say this? An example, for example, for one CLO, for cognitive skills, PLO3, for example, we design it to have at least 2 criteria for under that assignment. For that 2 criteria, probably criteria number 1 is only like understanding on the element or the fundamental part of it. Not fundamental, maybe application of that knowledge. So probably that will be about 5% out of the total marks. And the other one is the ability to evaluate. So we want to ensure that the students have the ability to evaluate. So we make sure that criteria has a higher weightage compared to the ability to only to apply that knowledge, the cognitive skills. So that is what I mean by having support on a different level of students' ability. So the next part is actually this is the part where most of engineering programs need to comply with or comply to, which is the integration of authentic assessment with complex problem. When we started off with the Kalohia project, we, how to say, found out like, okay, these are the dimension, these are the dimension for the framework, and then these are the suitable type of teaching and learning activities, these are the suitable type of assessment. And then when we go into the authentic assessment part, we realize that authentic assessment is actually in relation to the needs of complex problem. And for engineering accreditation standards, okay, this is just going a little bit on the EAC standard. We actually need to address the complex engineering problems. And just for a general information, this is actually required as part of the standards. We need to address this in all of our learning outcomes. And complex engineering problems have at least 7 characteristics as shown here. I'm not going to go detail, but we can see here that it goes beyond to the it goes more on the HOTS, higher order thinking skills. It goes beyond the C3 level in cognitive domain. So when we see this, we see that there are 7 complex engineering problems definition that we need to address. Okay. And in our, how say, findings between the authentic assessment and the complex engineering problems, we see that it is actually interrelated. Okay, because authentic assessment, in order for students to complete the authentic assessment, they need to have like a specific skills, specific abilities for them to do that. And when we see that the authentic assessment requires like a probably not a single solution. It requires a very, how to say, depth of knowledge, in-depth knowledge, at a certain knowledge profile level, and then it might how to say, include a many conflicting requirement. We see that authentic assessment is part of the complex engineering problems. So Dr. Nurida later on will try to show you how we design our rubric to answer both. One, to design it according to authentic assessment, and to try to apply the concept of complex engineering problems in the same rubric. So, authentic assessment, I will say here that AUA. So, AUA involves tasks that simulate real-world challenges. This applies to all, making it a very effective method to address complex problems. And AUA are designed to be realistic, relevant, and meaningful, encouraging students to apply their learning in practical situation. This does not only, how to say, covers in engineering, but in every programs, I think it is very related to. And when we see this, that there are 4 elements that is importance in the integration of authentic assessment and complex problem. Number 1 is the real world relevance. So here it says that the task in authentic assessment should closely mirror real world challenges students are likely to encounter in their professional lives. So it doesn't matter whether it is engineering, or it is medical, or it is management, for example. The task in authentic assessment must mirror to the real world challenges. This is to prepare the students, our graduates, for future professional lives. The next one is interdisciplinary approach. So complex problem usually often require knowledge and skills from multiple disciplines. It doesn't necessarily need to be only from how to say, one specific topic. So usually complex problem acquire the students to how to say, reach to a certain level for them to be able to solve complex problem. And for example, for them to be able to do it in the 3rd year, meaning they already accumulated all of the knowledge, prior knowledge, from year 1 to year 3. So therefore, then only they can actually complete the complex problem. So it says here, authentic assessment should encourage students to draw on various fields of study. This means that the students need the ability to collaborate and integrate their knowledge from prior education, regardless at which level they are. Thirdly, critical thinking and problem solving. Authentic assessment should challenge students to think critically and develop solutions to complex problems, which is actually incorporation of higher order thinking skills in the assessment. Number 4 is the reflection and feedback, which is incorporating opportunities for reflection and feedback helps students to understand their strength and areas for improvement, which is in very true practice of CQI, which is continuous quality improvement. Okay? And this can happen at the course level and also at the program level. In summary, okay, alignment of learning outcomes ensure quality, consistency, and global recognition in accordance with the national and international framework. And in our case, we have the MQF 2.0, or we how to say, we translate it into our 11 USM PLO, and then we also have our program standards, okay, and also we have international framework Kalohia. So regardless any framework that we follow in our program, we need to be able to ensure our alignment of learning outcomes that is consistent and also follows the quality that is already set by the framework. Secondly, implementing authentic assessment in your courses can enhance student learning, engagement, and preparation for professional life. This is why we want to encourage for everyone to incorporate authentic assessment in their lessons. Okay, so authentic assessments and complex problems are closely linked, with authentic assessment serving as effective tools for addressing complex real-world challenges. And rubrics can be a tool for assessment with clear, relevant, consistent, and comprehensive criteria. And before I end my part, this is actually our Kaluhia Civil Engineering team in USM. So thank you. So Dr. Nurida, I think you can continue with your part. I will pass to you first, and then after that we will, how to say, entertain all the questions and answer. If anyone wants to ask any question, you can also type in the chat box. We will read and answer it after Dr. Nurida's session. Okay, thank you.
Alright, okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh, and a very good afternoon I bid to all. So, my name is Nurida Sabtu. So I will be presenting on the rubric design for authentic assessment. So before I begin, okay, so just a brief description of myself. So I am part of the Kalohia team for the School of Civil Engineering group. Okay, so can you see the slides? Right. So just a brief introduction of the Kalohia. So why I wanted to ensure that you all understand what Kalohia is because the rubric that has been designed today is basically in accordance to the Kalohia framework. Okay, but I will try to briefly sum in order for you to understand that it is applicable to all levels, meaning to say that you can apply this not just to the Kalohia framework, but you can also apply this at based on the USMPO, the EACPO, and even at your program level. Okay, so basically Kalohia is the measuring and comparing achievements of learning outcomes in higher education in Asia. Okay, so these are introducing the team. Okay, so there are about 14 universities as mentioned by Dr. Mastura just now. And I think one of the advisors from the European team, I think Prof. Alfredo from University of Porto, I think is also here with us today. So welcome, Prof. So I will try to very briefly introduce what Kalohia has done in summary. So in summary, there are a lot of jargons, I think, in Kalohia, but I will try to ensure that everyone understand at different levels so that you can understand what Kalohia has tried to attempt, and so that the dissemination of this the team's task, okay, so that they can disseminate the information much better. Okay, so basically we have been tasked to do three things. One is the development of the Kalohia framework. So basically, in other words, the Kalohia framework is basically like the program outcomes of EAC, the program outcomes of USM, the F framework, and etc. Okay, so when you look later at the design of the rubric, you can see that it is easily mapped between each other because it resembles each other in that context. Okay, so secondly, we are tasked to do the calculation of the SLT. Okay, so that is I think informed or have been disseminated in another platform. And the third one is implementing the authentic assessment, which is what I will try to attempt to do today. And not just the application of authentic assessment, but specifically today my task is to look at the rubric design based on the Calohia framework. And I will try to relate that rubric to all to different perspectives in that sense. Okay, so when we look at rubric design, okay, so from the two perspectives, so CO or PO base, which is on the left hand side there, is actually looking at the program outcomes of USM, the program outcomes of EAC, or even the program outcomes of MQF. Okay, and when we look at the competency base, it is based on the Calohia framework, and there are different terminologies reflecting somewhat similar thing in both of the framework. Okay, so when we design the rubric, okay, so of course you have to look at whatever your course outcomes are. Okay, then for the CO or the PO base, which is our usual or our typical framework, we will look at the program outcomes, we will look at the taxonomy level, and we will look at, okay, for those from the engineering, we will look at complex problem, WK, the knowledge profile, and we will look at engineering activities, which is also the EA. When we look at the competency base, which is the Calohia framework, so you have the course outcomes, you have the dimensions, you have the sub-dimensions, and you have the domains. So I will try to show you a little bit later on what the dimensions, sub-dimensions, and domains actually are. Okay, so in order for you to design the rubric, of course, you have to also understand the entire mapping of the system, okay, of all of the frameworks. Okay, so this is just a slide showing you the link between the the School of Civil Engineering's PO, okay, in relation to the MQF 2.0 in terms of the 5 domains. Okay, and if you look here, so this is our comprehensive, which is what we practice in the School of Civil Engineering. So we have the map between the all, which is the based on the EAC 2020 standard. Okay, so the program outcomes of the School of Civil Engineering based on the EAC 2020 standard. Then we map that to the EAC 2024 standard. We also map that to the program outcomes of USM, and you have the soft skills and the learning taxonomy shown here. Okay, so in order for you to understand the rubric, I think it's imperative that you understand also the mapping and at your program level, okay, or at the school level. Okay, so based on the Calohia framework, so you have basically the dimensions. So the dimensions, if you can see, so the dimensions are basically divided into 4, okay, with the first dimension being learning and development. And for that dimension, it is subdivided into 3 different sub-dimensions, which is science and mathematics principles, civil engineering principles, and other complementary principles. So these are basically like a set of POs. So maybe PO1, okay, so for science and mathematics, it can be interchangeably related to PO1, and for civil engineering principles, it can be mapped to PO1, and other complementary principles, it can also be mapped to PO1. And then, if you remember, based on our usual practice of the PO, we have the set of skills is in the sense of we assess in terms of the cognitive, in terms of the psychomotor, in terms of the affective. But for the Calohia framework, so it assesses based on the 3 different types of domains, which is the knowledge, the skills, and the responsibilities. So there are descriptors, okay? Here are all of the descriptors for each of the sub-dimensions, for the dimensions as well as the sub-dimensions, and for each of the domains. Okay, so the team in School of Civil Engineering, we have actually tried to map down each of the Calohia framework, okay, each of the sub-dimensions to all of our own PO, okay, and you will see that we have the Calohia framework and our existing POs are similar. Okay, there are a slight difference in terms of, for the Kelohia framework, there is an added assessment of responsibilities, which is what we have or what we are not used to assessing at this point. Okay, so the orange colored is the completely mapped, and the non-colored version is actually the non-mapped assessments. Okay, and then so if you see here, it can be that for one subdimension, you can map it to a number of different POs based on the description of that subdimensions. Okay, so and then I will bring to you what authentic assessment are. So for this example, so based on the Kelohia's discussion, so even between all of the universities in the working group, the specific area group, okay, which is the civil engineering group for different universities, so most of us agree that the IDP or the integrated design project is the best representative, okay, of what an authentic assessment are. But of course, now that when we're looking at the complex problem assessments, so those assessments are also a good representation of what authentic assessment are. So basically, this is the highest level or the highest order of what authentic assessment is. And I will try to just bring to you how we can relate the existing rubric that we have into the new Kelohia framework, and how we can see at the framework level. Okay, so just a quick example of IDP. Okay, so I'm sure that a lot of you are familiar with this. So the course code is EAA 495. It's conducted at the first semester of the final year. Of course, it is a core course, and for this course, the students are to design a development project, okay, using real data by integrating various sub-areas of civil engineering. Okay. Okay. It is also not limited to preliminary planning. Okay, there are earthwork, impact studies, building and infrastructure design, geotechnical, as well as project management. So basically, the IDP encompasses all of the subspecialty of civil engineering specialty. Okay, so students are required to work as a team, and there are other specifications that the students have to follow. Okay. So in general, the students have to first define the problem. Okay, they have to identify who the stakeholders are. They have to set the project requirements as well as the specifications. Okay, so then they are to come up with design solutions, and then those design solutions are to be based on civil engineering manuals and guidelines, and also consider sustainability aspects, okay, in the design itself. Okay, so they have to synthesize all the technical definitions, all the regulations, and all the specifications in order to come up with a good design solution. So apart from that, they are also required to perform cost estimation and monitor progress towards achieving the project goal. So in terms of the cost distribution, so there are 40% of report, 20% of presentation, 10% of viva, 20% of tests, and 10% of working effort. So this is a 100% coursework-based course, and therefore, because it integrates a lot of elements with a lot of complexities, with a lot of data, therefore, this is one of the best representation of an AUA. So if we look at the cost mapping, so I will just take one. So we were tasked to adopt or try to come up with a rubric for one of the subdimensions. So in this task, we selected, so basically we selected 3 cost outcomes, okay? So cost outcome number 2 is to generate creative design solutions using standard engineering design processes. So this is actually mapped to PO3, PO4, and PO5 of School of Civil Engineering, but it is actually mapped to the sub-dimension of utilization of appropriate tools, okay, which is PO5, and this is for the Kelohia framework, okay. So another course outcome, okay, which is also the synthesizing of technical knowledge of detailed engineering design. Okay, so this is PO6, PO7, and PO8. Okay, so this is actually mapped to the sub-dimension 3.4, which is ethics and professionalism, okay, which is mapped to our PO8, okay. So, and also the sub-dimension of lifelong learning for CO4, which is the synthesization of technical definitions, regulations, specifications from engineering codes, manual standards, guidelines, and etc. Okay, right. So for the project overview, so they were given data, so they have to develop a certain area of land. So they were given what things to design for, okay, so how many units of buildings, how many units of terrace houses, halls, surau, and what are the criteria that they have to incorporate. So they were given some but very limited data, so of the location of the project, so they were given contour map, DTM, DEM, and at the end, it's not at the end, at the start of the project, they were given deliverables, okay, in the form of each specific subject, okay, or each specific speciality. So there are guidelines in terms of the sewerage, in terms of the cost estimation, roadworks, stormwater, and etc. Okay. So these are examples of what the guidelines for deliverables are. Okay, so this is the example for roadworks. So in the guidelines for deliverables, they have to have the objective and then input and what are the method that is actually used, and then they have to have or they have to achieve what the outcomes are. Okay, and they are also given a range or some elements of guidelines for them to follow. Okay, so this is a replica. This is basically similar to other deliverables. Okay, for example, site investigations, earthwork, and etc. Okay, so I've just only shown you some. And now we come to the part of the assessment method, which is the rubric for the IDP. So this is the this is the existing rubric for the IDP. Okay, so this is actually based on the, so when I mentioned the CO or the PO base, this is based on our usual practice of mapping for the program outcomes of USM versus the mapping of the program outcomes of the School of Civil Engineering or MQF, okay, for example. So in this example, so I've just taken one example, okay, based on the PO5, which is the usage of modern tool. So if you look here, there are criterion for evaluation, okay, and then there are the Likert scale, and then there are also the description of what the CO is, okay, that the students have to achieve, okay. So this one is based on the ethics, okay, so PO6 and PO7, which is ethics and professionalism. So this is assessed, I think for the PO6 and PO7 is actually assessed using the rubric, and then we have using the project, okay, and then we also have the PO8 assessed via a test, okay. But so you can see that there are different criteria for evaluation, and then you can see that as you have more criteria for evaluation in a rubric, your rubric will tend or will be more explicit and will be more consistent between the marking between many staff. Okay, so as you all are aware, the IDP is marked by several teaching staff. So of course, you want your rubric to be consistent. So as you have more criteria, okay, for evaluation, therefore you will have a more consistent marking style, okay, or marks, okay. And then this is the example for PO6 and PO7. Oops. Oops. Sorry. Okay.
It's not moving, eh? It's not moving to the
Sorry.
next slide.
It's
Okay.
connected to the mouse is actually connected to another device now because of the Bluetooth, I think. Okay, so then you have the PO11 for the lifelong learning for the personal and it's mapped to the PO11 of personal skills of the School of Civil Engineering. Okay, so then how do we map this based on the Kelohia framework? So if you remember just now, the Kelohia framework is based on competencies. It is based on three competencies, okay, or three domains, okay, which is knowledge, which is skills and responsibilities. So each of the rubric has been designed to map all of the criteria for all of these domains, while also considering the descriptions of each of the dimensions or each of the sub-dimensions of the Calohia framework. Okay, so you will see that later on I will show you, you will see that this is interchangeable with the method that we can use, where we can map the sub-dimensions to our PO and to our WP, to our EA, and etc. Okay, so on your left hand side is actually the sub-dimension. So this is the sub-dimension. So if you can see, these are the sub-dimensions. So in this example, I've just taken a screenshot of the sub-dimension 3.4, which is ethics and professionalism. But I will show you the entire sub-dimensions for you to see later on. Okay, and if you see on the top part here, you have the domains. Okay, then you have the Likert scale. Okay, from 1 to 5. And then you have the descriptors, and you also have the criterias. Okay, divided into multiple sets. Okay, so you can have the criteria, the more criteria you have, I think the more explicit, as I mentioned just now, the more explicit your rubric will be. So your criteria can be in here, but in your description of each of the your descriptors, it can also have more information, meaning to say what are you actually assessing the students up on. Okay, so the more descriptors you have and the more criteria you have, the more explicit your rubric will be. And then, of course, as Dr. Mastura mentioned just now, you can also have the weightage. So, for example, here this is just an example, okay, of weightage. So you can put more weightage on a certain element. So, for example, in the ethics and the professionalism sub-dimension, okay, you can put more weightage on the first criteria, which is the competency in the knowledge of the codes and ethics. It can be that, okay, so for example, it can be that you are assessing more on their effective, okay, so it can be that if they have more understanding of local values or more knowledge of law and regulation, it can be that you can give higher weightage to any of these criteria. But of course, if you look here, typically your primary criteria would be the one which you have the highest weightage of. And then you can give the students the marks and the total. Okay, so this is for the first domain of knowledge. And then you can have, so for the Calohia framework, so it's then assessing on the skills domain. So for our typical practice, we map our PO to cognitive, psychomotor, and affective. But the skills here in the Calohian framework doesn't necessarily mean that it's actually psychomotor, okay? But it encompasses also knowledge, and it can be motor skills and knowledge and affective, okay? So you can, there's a slight difference between the Calohia framework versus our existing practice, okay? So you can see here that based on the skills domain, okay, it is basically the same as well, okay? You have the Likert scale, okay, and you have the criteria. But of course, here it's shown only 2. You can have more than 2, 3, 4, 5, and etc. Okay, so for the Likert scale, okay, it was mentioned. Okay, so we had an exercise with our for our mock accreditation a couple of weeks ago, and in that session with the panels, we were advised, okay, to maintain the scale of, it's not to maintain the scale of 1 to 5, but if you have the scale that is actually from a certain range, for example, 1 to 2, 2 to 3, or 2 to 5, so it's actually mentioned, or it was actually asked, how do you differentiate between the marks of 2, 3, and 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so if you have a certain range, so what's the difference between the marks for that range in one, how do I say, in one description? Okay, so it's good, or it's, I think it's easier if you have the Likert scale for example, just in 1 to 5, because that gives you more specific marks, okay, or in that sense, okay, because it's easier for you to gauge, okay, between what is 2 and 3. Okay, so if you have a gray area between 2 to 5 for a certain scale, so that is difficult for you to justify. Okay, it's not necessarily, I'm not sure, it depends on the practice of the school as well. Okay, so this is the based on the competencies of the responsibilities domain, and you can see that collectively, okay, we can map, or we have tried to map the rubric, okay, for all of the 3 domains. Okay, so you have the knowledge domain, the skills domain, and the set of responsibilities, and it is based on the different dimensions, okay, of the Calohia framework. Okay, so I will try to show this to you, okay, in a much better representation. So I will try to share with you. Okay. Okay, I will try to share with you. So if you can see here now, okay, so you can see that the different dimensions, so there are the dimensions, can you see? So I hope you can see, right? Okay, so there are different dimensions, and then it's mapped to different sub-dimensions, and for each sub-dimensions, it can be mapped to different criteria, or you can have different criteria for assessment or for assessing that different dimension. And you can also then map this to the different set of PO. So for example, if you have your own PO, okay, your own school's
Dr.
PO.
Nurida, can you enlarge it so that everybody can see? Because it's quite small, I think.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. Can you see? Okay. So the overview is that generally, okay, you can have an entire framework, okay, where you have a rubric, or where you have a set of criteria mapped to each sub-dimensions, and then mapped to each of the dimensions. Okay, so what it means is that, okay, so because each of these criteria is also mapped to our PO, be at your school level or at USM level, okay, or of course school level, it's also mapped to the EAC. Okay, you can have, for example, a more standardized rubric at your program level. So this criteria is actually replicable for all POs, if you get what I mean. Okay, so what it means is that, okay, for PO1, for example, you can have a number of criteria. Okay, for example, 1, 2, so you have 3, 6. This is all mapped to PO1. Okay, and then you can have the criterions mapped to that PO based on the description of the existing PO. But of course, this rubric was designed based on the criteria, or based on the description of the Calohia framework. So you will see that, okay, how do I say this? So you can see that, okay, for one PO, it can be, okay, for one PO, you can have multiple criteria describing or assessing that PO. When you apply your rubric into your authentic assessment, you can sort of pick and choose which criteria that is relevant, okay, to the assessment, and you can basically tailor-make that criteria. So you can change some of the descriptions to tailor-make, to suit or to fit to your assessment, and to fit to the WP, which is your complex problem description, so that you can apply it at your program level. Okay, so if you look here, or if you can see here, okay, for the Calohia framework, okay, so I will explain first based on the Calohia framework. Okay, so there are multiple 4 dimensions. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so we have 4 dimensions, and for each of the 4 dimensions, we have Okay, for example, dimension 1, we have 3 subdimensions, and then we also have knowledge, and then it moves to skills, and then it moves to responsibilities. Okay, so it can be that this methodology can be adopted at program level so that you can have a more standardized rubric, okay, representing the same PO, okay, and between the same PO and then describing that PO, sorry. Okay. All right. So you can see here, okay, so I don't know if you can see collectively, this is what it looks like for the 4 dimensions, and you can think of this as though it's 12 POs. So assuming that the left, because we have actually tried to map all of the dimensions. So for example, the dimension number 1 is mapped to PO1, which is engineering knowledge. And then for subdimension 2, okay, subdimension 2.1, it's mapped to PO2 of the School of Civil Engineering, which is the EAC. But it can be interchangeably mapped to PO3 or PO10 or PO11, sorry. So this is PO11 of USM, okay? And then you can see that PO3 and PO3 again, PO5 and PO2 of USM, PO6 similar, which is similar. And then we have, okay, for example, PO12 project management of the school, which is EAC, and with the PO8 of USM. Okay, so each of the PO, what it means is that for each of the PO, you can have a set of criteria describing that PO, and then you can use that, okay, at program level, you can use that so that although you have different assessments, you would have a similar rubric of then of course each of the owner, okay, each of the course owner would have to look at each of these criterias, okay, and basically enhance it further to specify what they are actually assessing on. Okay, so if you look generally, in general, the trend is, okay, so just very simply you can see that between the same PO, you will see that although you have different criteria, the set of description, the initial description is actually somewhat similar. Okay, and okay, I don't know what else to say. Okay, so so what's interesting is that, okay, so for the Calohias framework, what's interesting or what is difficult to be assessed is actually on the responsibilities domain, okay? Because I think we are more familiar with assessing cognitive, with assessing affective, psychomotor, but when we talk about responsibilities, it's much more difficult and for us to get the clear criteria, okay, of what the assessment should be. But I think this is looking at the or from the Calohias perspective. But I think at engineering level or at other schools level, okay, it's enough that for one set of PO you have different criteria with different Likert scale, with 5 Likert scale or somewhat 3 to 5, okay, and then you have different criteria describing it, okay, and then different weightage. And I think you can then pick and choose to customize your own rubric for your program or for your assessment. Okay, so I think that sums it up. Okay, so I have I don't know if there's any questions. So thank you very much. Is that okay? Dr. Masud? Thank you very much. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Dr. Rida. So we would like to open to any question.
Any questions? Or was that confusing?
Probably quite detailed in terms of the rubric, but the basic general concept is there.
Yes.
Because the design of the rubric is need to be as clear as possible. in order for us to gauge the students' performance.
Yeah, I think one of the comments by the panel was, I'm not sure whether everyone would agree on this, was that it's good to have general descriptions describing the same PO. So that is where the idea for this rubric sort of comes about. So when you have that one PO, you can have many criteria describing it, okay, based on the description of that PO itself, okay, and you can then map as well to your WP, you can map to the WK and etc. by adding words, okay, into the description of the rubric itself, okay, or into the descriptors of the criteria.
Some of the comment that we received when we started to design rubric includes how to quantify the description, right? So because otherwise it will be very vague, like how much amount of work that students need to do to complete. So at some point, we will also encourage to quantify the description. For example, the students able to follow the requirement, 3 out of 5 requirements, for example, or the students are able to complete 3 out of 5 tasks. So that should be also some of the suggestion to be incorporated in the description, right?
Yes, that is actually also a good practice, and one of the ways that you can enhance the descriptions in each of the element of the criteria. So you can have even in terms of maybe you have minimum of 20 references, minimum of 5. So if you have more than 20 references, you will achieve excellent mark of 5. So if you have less than, so if you have 15 to 20 references, for example, you will get 4 and etc. So you can put that in the sense of quantify. That's why I think it's important that the more, it's not just the criteria that you have, the more criteria you have, the more explicit your rubric will be, but it's also that when you have more descriptions of each of the elements, so the more words the more, descriptions of what you're trying to say, the more explicit it will be.
Yeah, I think, yeah, that's the key word. The description must be explicit enough.
Yes.
So that the students know, okay, this is the amount of work that I need to do. And also, as I mentioned just now, it must also be translated when we dig into the design of rubric. It also includes the amount of work, which is translated to the SLT of the students' work. So for that matter, it means that it is very important for the rubric to be fair to the students. So otherwise, students will feel like, this is like maybe too difficult to be completed or too easy to be completed. And probably, another example is that the requirement stated in the question is a lot, but the rubric is too general. So yes, so then the marking will be like very unfair, I would say, because you expect the students to complete based on a detailed requirement, but the rubric is not detailed or explicit. So that's why I will encourage for a good practice, even for rubric also, it must be like at least vetted or discussed, so that everyone can agree on the suitability of the rubric.
One of the idea of, I don't know, so this is just throwing it out of the bat. Okay, so one of the idea is when you have it's not a comprehensive, so when you have a comprehensive rubric that describes all of the PO that one program is actually using, so you can vet it once, and then I think that would, and then if there are any changes to the rubric, then it can be vetted, so that assessment or that specific assessment can be re-vetted because there are changes in the rubric. But if you're using or if you're opting for the same specific criteria that have already been vetted, therefore you can you can actually perhaps save time a little bit actually on that.
Yes, and I think that when in our experience also, we realize that at some point, somehow the rubric can be designed similarly for all coursework elements. For example, let's say for communication skills, so everybody in the program can use the same rubric. It's just that
Yes.
probably you add more criteria that is specifically required for that particular assignment. So
Yes.
that will be also a very good practice. So everyone will use similar rubric. It's just that the elements
Yes.
can be added more. So maybe the
Yes.
quantifying number will be different. And then probably you want to specifically focus, for example, communication skills like ability to talk in public, but very detailed on a certain topic, on a certain element. You can put it in the description, isn't it?
Yes, the general description. So what I meant just now, I think the idea, what I was trying to say was that, so for that same PO, the general description is the same, but the specifications for each of us, the specification is actually based on the different subjects or the different coursework itself, okay? So yeah, but the idea is that if you have, for example, PO9, which is communication just now, so for that same set of PO, you can have different criteria assessing that one, but the specifications is actually tailor-made, okay, or tailored to the specific course or the specific assessment.
Yeah, we can have the same criteria, we can have the same description, but we can put a more, how to say, explicit statement in the description to align with the requirement of the assignment. I'm still waiting for a question, but it
Sorry,
seems that
there are no questions. I
we're
think we
not
can.
sure whether it is like too complicated
I
or
hope it's not complicated. So I have tried to simplify it down based on the Kelohia experience. I have tried to relate actually the Kelohia experience to our existing practice. I think perhaps due to my nervousness, did not come out
it
as
was
clear
it was
as
okay. For me, it was okay. But I hope
clear
that
as
everyone also feels okay.
intended.
Yeah.
Any
Okay, Prof. Alfredo is asking, how can the other teachers be trained to use this approach? Any suggestion? Okay,
Dr. Mas can
in
answer?
our experience for our school is that the first thing that we need to know is that we need to understand the training, the talk, the approach that we do in our school is that we get to engage first on the authentic assessment. And then from that, we realize that, okay, in order for us to measure authentic assessment, we need to have a good rubric. And at the same time, somehow, it also, how to say, I think we come across the agreement because when we want to answer on the complex problem requirement from our standards, we require to have a detailed tools for the assessment, isn't it? So what happened is that we meet in between, and then through engagement, through discussion in our school, we managed to somehow get as many of us together to actually come to agreement to a certain point. Of course, it is not perfect. We are still learning, but I think the approach is that everyone in the program needs to sit together. Although it is very difficult, it should be like a starting point. Okay, let's get together. For example, laboratory course. I'm giving another example, not integrated design project. So in our laboratory course, what happened is that we have like 4 courses that actually falls under the specific laboratory course. We are not embedded in any other teaching courses, but we have separate 4 laboratory courses. So all of the teaching team for that laboratory course sit together and come out with a general rubric that is actually designed specifically for that specific course outcomes for laboratory. So from that, we realized that, okay, this is the first start. Everyone agree, we vetted the rubric. For example, the open-ended lab, the teamwork and everything. And then after that, we like after some times when we do the CQI, we realize, okay, we need to revise. we need to even revise to the course learning outcome for the laboratory because we realize that we need to address other competences. So again, we revise also our rubric. So in that sense, when especially our laboratory for everyone informations, we also need to address in open-end lab, this actually includes the authentic assessment.
Tak dapat pun.
So what we did is
tak tahu
that
result
we
mereka
sit
loh.
together and
Anak dah
then
dapat
we
dah result.
come out with
Oh, tak dapat
another rubric, and then we how to say align everything back, and then we how to say use that rubric and then how to say revise it again in the following semester and in the following years. So I think in my experience for the laboratory also it's already 6 years, right, since 2018 that we keep on how to say revise, not change it entirely because otherwise we cannot measure, but we improve. Like for example, oh, we know that we need to measure this in the laboratory. Are we still how to say implementing that in our teaching and learning in the lab? So it goes both way. So I think the approach to use authentic assessment, rubric in authentic assessment is that you need to sit together in a team and then propose and come up with a general one first and then go into the specific assessment requirement. Do you want to add more, Dr. Nurida?
Yeah, I think a lot of engagement I think is needed when you want to standardize a rubric, or if you want to even develop a rubric. I think the more hands the better, and a lot of CQI as well. I think that basically enhances the rubric time and time again. So as you do the CQI, you will enhance the explicitity of your rubric again and again, I suppose.
Yep. So if we don't have any more question, because we waited about 10 minutes for that, so maybe I can pass back to the chairwoman, Puan Wani. So thank you so much everyone for your kind attention. I hope this session is beneficial for you as well as for us. So we managed to deliver it. I hope that at least you get some information, if not all. And if let's say you have any question that you want to engage to us, by all means, you guys can email us. You can contact us directly. Those who have access to me directly can contact me directly. We can share with you more information on this. So thank you so much. I pass back to CDAE to continue the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Okay, as we come to the end of our session, I would like to express our gratitude to our esteemed speakers, Dr. Mastura and Dr. Nurida, for sharing your valuable insights and expertise with us. I think we shall see you again next time, perhaps in the next session, Dr. Both of you. Okay.
Inshallah.
Thank you so much. Okay, thank you so much.
Bye.
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 Okay. To all the attendees, thank you for your participation. Before we dismiss, please scan the QR code. I share first. Okay, please scan the QR code using the USM Passport app, or you can click the link given in the chat box to verify your attendance by 6 p.m. today. Also, you are required to fill out the e-survey in MyCPD. Thank you once again for joining us today. We hope you find this webinar informative and engaging. Keep an eye out for our future events from CDAE. Until next time, take care and have a great day. Thank you.